Yesterday, Mother Jones released a long-form article titled "The Website That Wants You to Kill Yourself and Just Won't Die." The article is, if you could guess, about kiwifarms, a website that, if you spend any amount of time online, needs no introduction. Although it was briefly shut down in late 2022, kiwifarms, as I am recording this, is still online, although unreliably. Regrettably, I must inform you all that for a time I lurked on the website. You see, once Geno Samuel was about 40 parts into his epic length Chris Chan docuseries, I decided to give it a look just to see what was there. Previously, I'd only browsed the Quickie, which also hosts an unhealthy amount of information about a single individual. I never made an account or posted anything, but I hopped from thread to thread about different disliked internet personalities. I was only able to lurk for about a week or so because, for lack of a better phrase, the vibes were off. There were hundreds of threads aside from the usual suspects of Chris Chan, Wings of Redemption, Darkside Phil, and Amberlynn Reed. Basically, any semi-notable YouTuber or journalist or internet personality you could think of each had their own thread with a disturbing amount of details about them. From real names, dead names of trans individuals, home addresses, the whole 9 yards. And for most of these people, I couldn't find a valid reason why they had their own individual threads. Not only that, but the slurs just flowed like water there, which is, concerning. On kiwifarms, there was a section called the Beauty Room or something similar. Basically, it was dedicated to very small online artists and beauty micro-influencers, some of whom I followed online for years. And at some point, it struck me. These people have threads not because they've done anything wrong, but simply because someone disliked them enough to make one. Eventually, I stopped browsing kiwifarms because of the off vibes. I stopped watching Geno Samuel's series because it was legitimately upsetting. Not because of anything Chris Chan has done, although Chris Chan has done a lot of disturbing things, but because of the extent that people were willing to go to e-stalk a person for, lest we forget, 15 years and counting. And once the hashtag dropkiwifarms debacle was unfolding online, I asked myself, why have I been engaging in lolcow culture? As stated before, I was never an active participant, but rather an observer, a bystander. I guess at that time I interacted with this content in a way that your aunt might interact with a piece of juicy gossip. Harmless and fun, but still usually at someone's expense. And that was, for the most part, how I treated it, as harmless gossip. My toxic trait is that I do love a bit of hot goss. I always have, even since elementary school. But when e-stalking and death threats are masquerading as hot goss, well, that's where we run into a problem. I think now is a good time to define what exactly lolcow means. Very simply put, a lolcow is someone who can be milked for laughs. Usually it's someone who's very eccentric or weird online, someone we can point and laugh at and go, wow, this person is such a weirdo, I'm glad I'm not like them. Usually though, it went farther than pointing and laughing and often veered into being actively antagonistic. If you're thinking, this sounds like bullying, you are 100% correct. It is. The Mother Jones article, which I will link in the description, points out that many of kiwifarms' targets are different in some way. Many are neurodivergent, or LGBT, or outspoken women, or their arch nemesis, a combination of those. Of course, cis-het men weren't free from ridicule, and targets ran the gamut politically from right to left wing. Adam Kovic, formerly of Funhouse, had his own thread as well. And sure, he's guilty of a lot of things, like harassing female employees at Machinima and Rooster Teeth and cheating on his wife a lot. But if you remember, all this came to light because Adam was having dangerous liaisons with someone who turned out to be a catfish. And the Google Drive with all the screenshots was posted on kiwifarms. I'd hazard a guess to say that the catfisher was a kiwifarms user as well. For a time, I was under the impression that these people were derided online because of some objectively awful thing they've done. Chris Chan, for instance, is pretty transparently a misogynist, a racist, and a frequent e-bigger. Other frequent flyers on the site are chronic liars and scammers. Johnny Craig, who went from being post-hardcore royalty to frequently milked lolcow, is an abusive person who got multiple people hooked on heroin and, most recently, got his son taken away from him because he tested positive for fentanyl. Some of these lolcows did legitimately deserve to be in prison. If what kiwifarms users said was true, that is. But others, what were their crimes? According to them, being autistic in public, being trans, being both trans and black, being an outspoken, if a bit disingenuous feminist in the world of gaming, making OCs with self-harm scars, the list goes on. And I'm not just rattling random things off, by the way. These were the characteristics of people with threads on that site. And that, apparently, was enough to have your life turned upside down by having your dead name leaked, or being doxxed, or being stalked in real life. I'm not going to try to wax analytical about why people engage in lolcow culture online. Ali Breland, the person who wrote the Mother Jones article, does a decent enough job. My reasoning for it, however, was a bit different than the one posited in the article. I just like being messy, I guess, something I'll need to work on. But I will say something other than the hashtag dropkiwifarms saga showed me that this kinda wasn't worth it. Ever since late 2015, I've interacted with artist spaces online. Yes, I was a DeviantArt girly and a Tumblr girly, but I started out on Instagram, eventually abandoning it for other platforms once they took away the chronological feed in early 2016. In my time on Instagram, I came across an artist who, at the time, went by tearzah. By the way, I am aware that this is that person's dead name, but it was also their online handle basically everywhere at the peak of their popularity at the time, so I'm kind of at a loss for how to refer to them. tearzah, like most of kiwifarms' targets, was autistic, non-binary, and perhaps a bit cringe. I really like their art though. I would even argue that they were the blueprint for a specific brand of creepy, cute gore art on Tumblr from 2016 to 2018. And if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't, and if you don't, you just gotta find out. In fact, the Instagram algorithm was so good at pinpointing my interests that I ended up finding a not insignificant amount of quote-unquote tearzah copycats on the Explore page. tearzah's main draw was their art style, the frequency of their uploads, which were several drawings a day at their peak, and their gigantic roster of original characters with interconnected stories. Yes, even some with prominent self-harm scars. tearzah was, to put it lightly, a troubled youth. From what I gathered after following them online for a few years, they endured some abuse as a young teen in a toxic relationship, had an eating disorder, and when I first discovered them, actively self-harmed. According to them, art was an outlet, and creating and drawing original characters was a special interest of theirs as an autistic person. They found a lot of notoriety from their skillful art, and also from their mirror selfies of a pastel bedroom full of stuffed toys wearing the hallmark late 2010s Tumblr girl uniform. People, usually very young people, idolized them, not only for their art, but because they were a pretty, skinny, femme-presenting person who was struggling just like they were. Tumblr at the time had a tendency to be a sort of negative feedback loop of pro-Ana and aesthetic self-harm content, and I would be lying if I said tearzah wasn't also contributing to that, even if unintentionally. And I did side-eye it myself, but being a teen and sort of new to these things, I mostly kept it to myself. I didn't want to speak out of turn. Eventually, after amassing a sizable following, plenty of copycats, and hundreds of dollars in art commissions on a weekly basis, tearzah got some detractors, and eventually got a kiwifarms thread of their own, listing all their transgressions, some real, some made up, most of them inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. Around the time I discovered this thread, tearzah was dating someone named Bailey. The relationship was a tumultuous one, and it ended with tearzah at that point going by dollieguts online, posting a full thread about the abuse they suffered at the hands of Bailey. Bailey was kind of a head case. This part is going to be a bit convoluted, so stay with me. Firstly, Bailey had their name legally changed to Bailey Lavelle. This is notable because the main antagonist of tearzah's world of original characters was also named Bailey Lavelle. This was also notable because Bailey the character was based off a real person who had abused tearzah in the past, who is also the in-universe abuser of tearzah's self-insert OC, Ash. And yes, Bailey, tearzah's partner, knew all of this. If that's not insane enough, Bailey was an active self-harmer. This isn't a moral failing on its own, but once they entered a relationship, Bailey coerced tearzah into resuming self-harm when they had abstained from doing so for a while. If that's not insane enough, then bestie, I have some bad news, it gets worse. Bailey lied about being a detransitioning trans man. They claimed their voice was deep, not because they were a cis man, but because they were taking tea and later regretted it. Bailey also coerced tearzah into sexual contact when they had trauma surrounding it and were hesitant to do so with a person who had male genitalia. The worst part about all of this is that most of the hate directed tearzah's way from kiwifarms was only partially about their perceived transgressions and mostly about what their partner had done and was doing online. So not only did they suffer at the hands of Bailey, but they suffered because of what Bailey was doing to others. Eventually, though, they broke up. The expose thread was posted, and things quieted down. These days, they don't post nearly as much as they used to, and have stopped using Tumblr entirely, despite it being their biggest platform, because that's where the majority of the hate was centralized. It was a complete mess of a saga, but thankfully, it seems to be fully in tearzah's rear view now, on the surface anyway. This is but one very small example of the ways lolcow culture is harmful, and I'd argue one of the less harmful examples. It stayed online, it lasted for only a few weeks, no one was stalked in real life, and nobody died. But there are quite a few people, despite whatever Joshua Moon says does or doesn't happen, who can't say the same thing. I kind of hate that the bar is so low when it comes to deciding whether or not an episode of online hate like this is harmful or not. Make no mistake, it all is. Dogpiling people online is far from new, and shows no signs of slowing down. Sometimes it takes the form of legitimate criticism, like that Michaela girl who's lying about mascara and breaking advertising regulations. But a lot of the time, it's just straight up bullying because someone doesn't stand Luna. With Kiwifarms, the line between legitimate criticism and bullying was heavily blurred. Chomos? Fair game. Tumblr artists getting a little too big in their britches? Also fair game, apparently. Although Kiwifarms, the website's days, are likely numbered based on what it's apparently costing Joshua Moon to run it on bootleg servers, Kiwifarms as a concept will likely never die. It started way back in 2007 with the inaugural Something Awful Christian thread, was bolstered with Gamergate, and took a heavy blow with hashtag dropkiwifarms. But targeted hate campaigns online will never die out. And although I was never an active participant in cow tipping, as I called it, the existence of bystanders and observers like me likely didn't help with the proliferation of it. And sometimes that passive bystanding turns into active antagonism. And sometimes that active antagonism on a large enough scale turns into lives lost. People say the Wild West era of the internet has long since ended, but I don't think we've really seen just how wild the saloon can get yet. And that's concerning. That's going to be it for me for this video, a little shorter than usual, but it's something I wanted to talk about after reading the Mother Jones article, which is again in the description. Follow me on Twitter, read my Medium articles, and listen to my podcast. We're back. We had about a month-long hiatus, but we are back on the YouTubes and on the Spotifys and the Apples and the Googles, and you can check us out. We'll have bi-weekly episodes as normal in the year of our Lord 2023. Okay, first, can we appreciate this? Like this is objectively very simple, but it turned out very well. I think this eye look is a sleigh. I'm designating it a sleigh. Hit the like button if you think it's a sleigh. Oh man. Anyways, I'm done.